Hello, I'm Lowell, he, him, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. This show draws on the experience and play of the Open Hearth Gaming Community. We are an online RPG gaming group which has lots of different kinds of games and gaming. We've got story games, we've got OSR, we've got solo, and more. So as usual for these episodes, we've brought on a pair of community members here to discuss their recent gaming and drill down on an RPG or topic, something they've played, read, watched, or experienced. Anders, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
And returning as a longtime co-host of the previous installment version life of this podcast, Sherri Stewart.
Hi, it's nice to see you again, Anders and Lowell. Well, I see you all the time.
Yeah, fair enough. So in segment one, we will go around and have everyone tell us about how the recent gaming has gone, what they've played or have coming up, and then talk with us about a particular game. So, Sherri, we're going to start with you.
Okay. Recently, I feel like I'm not playing that many games, but then I look at the list and I'm playing a lot of games. So, face to face, we're playing Mutants and Masterminds. It's as tried as can be and a hoot. It's just fun to play superheroes and just have like all of that little micro control on things. And we don't do it a lot. So when it's just a little taste of a thing that you do, it's super fun and super hilarious because we have all played a lot of story games. And so going back to the very mechanical bits kind of has its own fun to it. I've also been playing Sunken Hearts, which is a hack of Hearts of Luland, Monster Hearts. It's a PBTA game with a ton of moves that's kind of trying to pull out the best of Changeling the Lost into a cohesive set of a world, so to speak. And it's a ton of fun. That's written by Lowell and played with our kind of standard Wednesday night group. I've been playing Die by Kieran Gillian. Just got finished with the first arc of that, and that has been a very striking game. As well, I just finished up doing a play test session of Protect a Child by Digital Glitch Games, who is Mint, essentially, and that was a lot of fun. Have played a pair of games called Dog Days, and there's like a Dog Days, a couple different versions, different kinds of games that are put together to play a sense of a world in which the ascendancy of man has fallen and the world of animals is taking back the thing. It's a very magical one. It's all about the vibe, and the vibe we chose was noir. So this is talking noir animals, and it is every bit as crazy and magical and strange as you could imagine. It's been very fun. That is a game that is in development and was a gift to two players as a Christmas gift from Ray Najati, and it has been a hoot. And then also we're playing Star Trek Adventures 2.0, and that's been great. But today what I wanted to talk about, because I play a lot of hacks and I do a surprising amount of play testing. And so I thought that what I would do is talk about that because it's both much simpler thing to do, and also it does require a different mindset when you're doing it, or at least a certain set of things that you want to be careful about, in my experience, as doing it. So I just got out of a play test with Digital Glitches Protect the Child, which, by the way, is shaping up to be amazing. So keep an eye out for it. And then I'm always playing a hacks. And everything that Ray is working on, I will often play test to. So I've just gotten out of play tests for Tomb Raider, the upcoming Tomb Raider game, and that's been wonderful. One of the things is I'm play testing those things, but it's not that I'm a designer. I don't have any design chops. I go into those games and all I'm really doing when I'm play testing is being my kind of player and seeing how the system, the materials that are in front of me, the interactions that are sort of built into the system, how those work for my play style. I'm just not an expert in design. I do have a very strong sense of how I play. I am always going to bring those elements in. So I am useful in the sense of, if you're looking for this type of player, this is how they're going to be, first be reacting to these things in the state that they are now. So this is the thing. This is what I bring. I'm one type of player. I like to solve problems more than I like causing them. I'm fine with complicating my own situation, but I don't like to make things bad for other people or even for NPCs. That just seems terrible to me, you know? I have great curiosity and fondness for the NPCs in the world. I like to be able to interact to help them. And I always, the first thing is when I'm in a game, I'm always like, how do I help someone else when they're going to be doing a thing? What are those mechanics? What are the things that I'm doing? Those are the things that are always going to be touching on when I play. It's not that that's the greatest thing, but there are players like me. So that's the thing is if you're play testing, you're trying to get different kinds of players and seeing how they react. And so I have a very particular set of things. When I'm play testing, my job is to react to the game design, but indirectly. I am reacting to the game as it rolls out. So it's that sort of brew of system, GM players, characters, randomizers. And the only commentary that I feel that I have the right to make is how organic it feels in the playing and the interplay with other players, and maybe how clear and accessible it seems in the moment when I'm playing. Like if I'm having trouble going, oh, I just did this thing and this happened, and now what are my options? How much am I scrambling to figure out what I can do from those things, what my options are? Those are the things that I feel like I can talk about. And I never, ever talk about, oh, I want moves that do this, or I want this thing that lets me do this, or I think a move that does this should always do. I just don't have any of those kinds of sets of how a game ought to be. I've played enough that I know that all kinds of systems can create a wondrous game. And it's just a matter of seeing what it feels like in that play, in that first set of interactions. And then if I get to play test longer, how it rolls out and how satisfying it is in the long run. There are designers who play enough with me that they have jokingly designed playbooks for me. And honestly, every one of those playbooks has been a joy for me to play. So I am enough of a type that people can design for my type. And they keep the playbooks in the design. So they must not be the worst playbooks. I always love that. In Tomb Raider, there's one called The Protector. And that was literally Josh wrote for Sherri on what he designed. So, and it was just really good. But the one thing that I know is that I can speak to the elements of the playbooks or the character creation that drew my eye and the things that excited me or puzzled me or created a sense of hesitation. I don't know what the problem is. I don't know what it should be, but I can tell you what my initial reaction is. I can also speak to move skills that felt right or wrong in the moment. And that is where I, as a playtester, come to it. Now, if I were a designer, I might have more to say, but I have also been in playtests where people go on a long time on design concepts and their own sense of how moves should be. And I don't think that's particularly useful to the person who's doing the playtesting. So it's one of those things of if you're in there and you're playtesting, for God's sake, just play. Treat the game like, okay, this is how I reacted to it. This is where I felt I had the freedom that I wanted. This is the things that excited me and made me do something I might not have done otherwise. Your reaction should first and foremost be those. And then if you want to talk philosophy, wait until towards the end when everyone's had a first say and then kind of go, hey, if you want to talk about that, you can do some more of that. Because I'm not going to say it's uncomfortable, but sometimes, people really have a real odd sense of what they think that the designer who's doing the playtesting needs to be hearing. And I will answer their questions. I will answer the playtesters' questions to whatever extent I can, but I don't have any philosophy of what they should be doing. So that's just my thing. I love playtesting, mostly because I love playing. And I don't mind something that's a little ramshackle or in progress because that leaves a sort of fruitful space where we go, oh, what will we do? Oh, let's try this. Okay. And it may or may not work, but I've been in that situation so many times in games that it doesn't slow me up. So if you can deal with something that's in a maybe not finished state and stuff, playtesting is a hoot. You're interacting, you're discovering with other people how a thing works or where it doesn't or whatever. And it's just a kind of fun game that has a sort of meta level to it, but that you don't have to engage with all the time, just as requested. So that's really all I wanted to talk about.
Anders, you've done a lot of design and playtesting. You're working on the Stars in the Dark and so on. Thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I've done a lot of design and not a lot of play testing either, but we did play.
You're talking down what you've done. You've done quite a bit.
We played Stars in the Dark for a long time. I'm hopefully coming back to it again later this year at some point. I think knowing that, Sherri, like you said, knowing what kind of player you are is extremely helpful when you're playtesting something. I think that's great for the designer to have players who know for themselves and can tell you that I like this sort of thing, I don't like this sort of thing. I'm still going to engage with this game on its own merits. I may not be able to give this part a fair shake, but I'll be good at this sort of thing. I think that's really helpful, because it sounds judgmental, but the worst kind of player is the player who doesn't know what their tastes are. They have tastes, but they can't relate it to other people's tastes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think we all have the experience when we start out playing, like, this is the way you play role playing. And then you play with another group, hopefully. Not everyone does that. Some people, they just stay with their same group and they're playing together, and that's just how they play. But for most of us, at least in this community, and I assume the people listening to this podcast, you have the experience of playing with a different group, and you realize that, oh, they play this way, or this person is doing that sort of thing. I didn't know you could do that. Having those experiences again and again and again, for me, that's what's helped me grow as a player and made me, I assume, slightly better at designing things. Because you can understand that, oh, if I'm making this game in this way, then it's for this kind of player. And I should make that clear. Which is not to say that every player is one kind of player. You can have different tastes at different times. But I think that awareness is really useful. And conversely, for a designer, being very clear about what you want out of the playtesting that you're doing is absolutely crucial. Because if you just give the players a game and tell them to play it, they're going to play it the way they always play, or the way they prefer to play. And that may not be what the game is intended. So that's also important. As always, communication is important.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book that Dan Brown suggested to me that I read basically on doing project and design critique that talks about some of those steps of when you're doing critique, the first thing you have to know is, do they want you to do critique? How do they want you to respond? What is it they want to know? Like, you need to know what their expectations are on it. Like you mentioned, the Sunken Hearts, the very earliest version of that hack, I remember running at the PBTA Changing the Lost hack, and I had someone in there who played a lot of Changing the Lost, and they had very different expectations about what Changing the Lost did, and they came in with those, and it was really striking to hear that and go, okay, well, that's not what this game is. It may be what you want it to be, but so yeah, it's tricky. I do love that in the community we do a lot of, hey, we're just going to put this on the calendar and let's see where the wheels fall off.
Yeah, and I've had that exact experience with, I think I threw together a quick Cortex hack for Changeling, and I think especially when you're translating a setting to a different system, people have a lot of expectations about, oh, I want these things that work in this particular way mechanically to work in a similar way in this new game, even if they are wildly different. And that's a hurdle.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for talking about that, Sherri. I think that's an important part of our community, and it's good to hear some conversation about that.
I love playtesting because I love working on the starting thing. I am used to wheels falling off, but there's a certain joy in chasing them down the street and getting them back on that is always fun. And a lot of times nothing that exciting happens, and it's just you figuring out how you do a road trip with some people, to a different destination. So it's good.
So, Anders, tell us about your recent gaming and what is it you want to talk about?
Yeah, my gaming so far this year has been pretty light, which was at least partly intentional. I had quite a lot of gaming the last couple of months last year, so I felt like I needed to take it easy for a bit. I didn't play anything in January, Right now, the only proper game I'm in is Cryptid Creeks, which Sabine is running. And that's a card from Brindlewood type of game. I've had different experiences with different card from Brindlewood games. I like the idea of the player-directed mystery, that sort of thing, and coming up with a solution and all of that. But in some of the games, it feels like the questions are so specific that I'm more playing out a prepared script than I'm actually involved with creating the mystery or discovering the mystery. And I'm not sure yet how I feel about Cryptid Creeks. It's a great group, so I'm having fun either way. I'm not sure where I land on. I've also done a couple of sessions of character generation for the Lavender Hack.
Yeah.
Lowell joined me for one of those. I've done some of this before with Beyond the Wall and Other Adventures, which has more involved character creation. Both of them are OSR games. The Lavender Hack is a bit simpler when it comes to the characters. But on the other hand, you have the culture and town generation, where you create the basic home base for the adventuring company that you're putting together. And creating those cultures was a lot of fun. I think that's a system that you can just grab from this and pull into other games very, very fruitfully. That was a lot of fun. We're also with my face-to-face group, which has been more off than on ever since the pandemic. We're looking at playing second edition Pathfinder. And this is a group I've played with a lot. And we've played various kinds of games, but more on the trad side. Played some feng shui and that kind of game. So this allows me to indulge my... I sometimes just love the nitty-gritty, very mechanical character design thing. Like the interplay between having an idea for a character and seeing what the mechanical bits are, combining those and seeing that, oh, like this kind of feat that allows me to do this sort of thing, then that can feed back into a character idea. So sort of the sculpting out a character that both works mechanically and also does something cool. So I enjoy that. We'll see what happens. Hopefully we'll set to do a joint, maybe not character creation session, but based talking out our characters, kind of a session 0 in about a week. I also read a few games over the holidays. That's when I usually do a lot of my game reading, including Deep Cuts for Blades in the Dark, which I highly recommend for anyone who's hacking anything Forged in the Dark. But the thing I mainly wanted to talk about, now that I've talked a lot about other things, is solo board games and the overlap between solo board games and solo role-playing games. There's been a bit of talk about solo role-playing games on the Discord lately. When it comes to solo games, I'm more of a board gamer than a role-playing gamer. But my main thesis here is that there's no real difference. That's not quite true. You can definitely find games that are, this is absolutely a role-playing game. You're doing a guided writing exercise, or it's mainly about like the emotional investment in whatever the game is about. And you have things that are definitely board games that are just purely mechanical. There's nothing else there. But then there's a fairly big overlap. I found games that tell me this is a role-playing game, and it turns out this is not a role-playing game. It's a purely mechanical exercise. And there are board games or games that tell me they are board games, but they have more in common with, or at least strong commonalities with role-playing games. I don't think it's possible to draw a line where you can say that, oh, these games are purely role-playing games, these games are purely board. I think there's a lot of overlap. And here I'm talking primarily about solo games, but I think this is somewhat true for other games as well. But that's not what I want to get into now, because that's a bigger topic. So I play a lot of solo board games. And I think where this thing where I feel like it overlaps with role-playing games is mainly in the ones that have a strong sense of story, or at least story moments. Some games have the very strong continuous story, like the Arkham Horror card game. That's very much about presenting what is essentially a role-playing scenario, but as a card game.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other games like Final Girl and Dawn of the Zeds, and this is the Final Girl board game, that are very inspired by movies and that sort of thing. Final Girl specifically is about playing out the third act of a horror movie, where you have the final girl who's going up against the killer and trying to save people, and you have that final confrontation. And you get a lot of the moments that feel very cinematic. But there are other games like Nemo's War, which comes from the war game tradition, but you're playing Captain Nemo, you're out sinking ships and finding treasures at the bottom of the ocean and trying to achieve various goals that are deeply emotionally resonant. Like you're fighting the colonialist forces and all of that. But there's no mechanical thing about it other than you get a thing at the end that tells you this is what happened. There are no prompts for you to invest yourself emotionally in what's happening, but it's hard not to do it when you know that you're working toward all of those things. And there are other games that are similar to that. Previously, my thought has been that role-playing games are games that use drama resolution. And this is Forge terminology, where they talk about 3 kinds of resolution: fortune, karma, and drama. Fortune resolution is when you use a randomizer, so you're rolling dice or drawing cards or something. Karma resolution is when you're just comparing numbers or saying, do you have this ability or not? And drama resolution is when you go to the fiction and you say that, oh, this is how things are in the fiction, therefore this mechanical thing happens. I'm standing behind the door. Oh, you get a +2 on your roll because you're surprising or whatever. So that sort of thing. And my previous thinking had been that if you have drama resolution, then this is definitely a role-playing game. But I'm not so sure about that. I think that's one clear characteristic of role-playing games, but I'm not sure that it's quite that easy. Specifically because I've encountered solo role-playing games that are definitely role-playing games, but they don't have this drama resolution. Everything is purely mechanical. You're following a procedure and you're going through mechanical things about what's happening, and you're invested in the fiction and you're discovering or inventing the fiction, and that's what the focus is on. But the fiction doesn't determine what happens mechanically.
No.
And I think 1,000-Year-Old Vampire is one example of this. You're rolling dice, which give you paragraphs of text with events, and those can affect you're making notes of your memories. They can affect abilities you have and that sort of thing. And your abilities can affect how you resolve various situations in the fiction. But the fiction doesn't feed back into, oh, because I'm now living in a castle in Spain, then obviously this sort of thing should happen. No, it's just when you're done with that paragraph, you roll the dice, maybe with some modifiers, but you don't determine the modifiers based on the fiction. They're based on mechanical things. And that gets you back to the next piece of fiction. You're always working in this mechanical procedure, which is how board games work. You're always inside the procedure. And there are board games that have some gestures, at least, towards drama resolution. I'm going to bring up Final Girl again because I've been playing that a lot lately. Essentially, each scenario is a combination of a killer, which is some sort of monster or slasher or something, and you have a location. And usually these paired together. So when you're fighting the not Jason Voorhees, but the masked slasher, you're at a summer camp. And those work well together, but you can mix and match, which means that you can have a situation where, oh, this gets weird when you combine this specific killer with this specific location. So they have a rule for that, which is essentially, we can't make rules for everything. If something happens that seems weird, decide what happened. And one of the ways you can do that is, what's the most realistic resolution of it? Which means you're going to the fiction and you're deciding what makes sense here. And that has a mechanical feedback. There's also, and this is very, very specific, but in one specific scenario, is it Tremors, the one with the worms from the underground?
Yeah.
You have that type of location where it matters how much noise you make, because if you're making noise, you can draw the attention of the enemies. And whenever you get an item there, you have to decide, is this a very noisy item, which is entirely a fictional decision. So those sorts of things exist in some. And there are games that are classified as role-playing games where you don't have very strong identification with your character, either because characters are very temporary, like in Microscope, which is generally considered a role-playing game. But there you dive momentarily into a scene, you play a character for maybe just a few minutes, and then you're out of that scene, and that character may never come back again. Or you can have very strong troop-style play, like with Ars Magica or Legacy, where you may have a character that is your character, but you're often playing other characters that are more temporary. And so I think you can have the same sort of experience with a solo board game that you can have with a solo role-playing game, if you choose to. If you choose to be emotionally invested, if you choose to focus on that side of things. I've done this with Eldritch Horror, which is a version of the board game Arkham Horror, where you have your investigators and they're traveling around the world and solving mysteries in the Cthulhu mythos universe. And I've done that as a journaling game. So I would do a move or turn, and then I would take some notes and write some in-character fiction about what was going on. You can do that sort of thing. And I think it's easier with some games than with others, but I think you can always choose to find that emotional investment and investing in the fiction. That's, I guess, what I want to talk about.
Sherri, before I say anything, let me throw to you.
I find it's very interesting because there's a thing of, and whenever there's any threat of story, I do overinvest. So I totally get you when you're talking about a solo board game and going, yes, this could be an RPG. But then there's also that thing of going, there's no one that I'm reacting to or that's reacting to me, which means that it's too much me. So I'm never sure if that's really role-playing in that sense. Like to me, there is that sort of thing of that there's other players feels like part of role-playing to me. But yeah, I completely get you because it's very hard for me to find a narrative that I can't insert my dramatic self into it.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that there is a difference between role-playing solo and role-playing in a group. And I think that relating to others and relating to yourself, like solo role-playing is often very introspective. If you want to be emotionally invested, you have to be introspective in a way that you don't have to be when you're playing with them.
It's interesting. I think about a number of the board games that try to do that emergent narrative, like Robinson Crusoe or Castaways, or I think it's Eighth Continent.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are some that try. I would argue that Tales of the Arabian Nights wants to have that emergent narrative, but because things are so disconnected and feel so random and stuff, it never gels. It never coalesces. It just feels like one bad thing happening after another because you've made a wrong choice. It feels really unfair. It's a game that when we played it a couple times and it was like, well, I'll be putting this box on the shelf. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think Arabian Nights, I have the very old version as well as the new big box. And it's a game I love a lot in theory, but I think in practice, you get exactly the effect you mentioned. It's just bad things happening at random, and there's very little connection between them. And that's, some games can pull that off. Eldritch Horror again. I think in general, Fantasy Flight games are really good at this, with having just a little snippet of fiction, and then you have all the mechanical stuff, and then they're good at naming things in a way that hint towards what this is supposed to be without spelling it out explicitly, which means you're pushed towards a certain interpretation, but you're not forced into it, which makes it easy to invent the fiction around it, that, oh, maybe it's actually this way, and this is the sort of thing that's happening. And sometimes, quite often, what's happening is just when you're playing at the table, you're still focused on the mechanics, and sometimes you just talk out the fiction because it's fun to do, and you get a weird interaction, and then you try to explain it in the fiction, and you get a very silly explanation. but that's still fun. And sometimes it's just, oh, this makes perfect sense. If this thing happens and this person is doing that. So with Arabian Nights, I think it's just a bit too disconnected, and it's a bit too obvious that it is just random things happening.
Yeah.
And in some games, like the Arkham Horror card game, it's a very strong story that they're telling, that you're really just following the fiction in that way, and that can also be a bit jarring. But when you can find that balance, it can be really...
Yeah, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but there are a number of these mystery-based games of late, like Detective, and there's that one that has a whole set of like LA investigations and things like that, that definitely have a story, and you're playing to uncover that particular story.
Mm-hmm.
And that the gamey part is, do you figure it out or not before the end kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to talk about my stuff now. So for my recent gaming, I've talked a lot about my gaming in recent episodes. So the only thing I want to say is, if you listen to episode 3 of the podcast, just know that I'm still hate playing the Kamibako video game. It's still making me mad. But the game I want to talk about is one that Sherri mentioned, is Die. And this is the game from Kieran Gillen, based originally on Kieran's 20-issue comic, which is a tight, complete story that's done. We were already seeing a version originally of Die while that was kind of still going on. The book is beautiful. The game has a ton going on in it. So the most slimmed down version of the pitch, if you don't know, is a group of people get pulled back into a fantasy world that they managed to escape from years ago. So we've got bits of Narnia, Peter Pan, isekai, and a host of other influences there. There's a lot of fiction that have worked in this space. Kieran goes in a very different meta, looking at role-playing games direction with the world itself. And you may start out with some expectations about what's going to happen early on, just based on your knowledge of things, and then it does not go there. It's wild. It's a great game for how weirdly it plays with the premise. So it is based on that licensed existing product, and there's some expectations about play if you've read that. And there's a way in which this game sticks very tightly to that original, and a way in which it goes, nope, whatever, and opens it up. So the most tight thing is a conceit about how the players can leave the world, but also that there are 5 character classes, and they are incredibly distinct. They're incredibly detailed. They have asymmetrical powers. They all have different costs and themes. So whatever die world you're working with, whatever themes you go with, you've got these playbooks, and you might rename them, might kind of change that to the focus, but boy, are they what they are in a really solid and compelling way. And I think that's really interesting. So you've got that, but then like everything else about the game, in some ways peels away from the original graphic novel. A lot of the assumptions, specific world building, setting details, the idea of each of these realms on this 20-sided die world having a creator, those things are kind of gone. Instead, you've got this very flexible premise with a huge toolkit of directions you can go in. Add to that, we've got those playbooks, those character class books, and when you first look at them, even on the sort of the printed out, simplified version, boy, do they look complicated. Boy, do they look like, oh my God, there's so much here and so many things. And that they're different rules, and they're doing different things. How do these interact? But once you get to playing, you go, oh, okay, this is actually pretty simple. I just kind of have to know what I've taken for my character. The actual D6 pool resolution is pretty easy and quick, and more able to be managed on the fly than you would have expected. Because, with Pathfinder or games that have a lot of crunch in the characters, sometimes actually coming up with stuff and resolving things on the fly is difficult. Not with this game. Everything is very, very easy and adaptable. There's so much that could be said about the different classes, how they get performed at the table, their costs. their thematics, the rules for magic, the way the game approaches, like it looks at all the classic monsters. They literally went through all the different monster manuals to figure out what the most common monsters are across different monster manuals, and then they made the like top set of them into the rules for this game. That's all really interesting, but that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to focus in on is how much this game has completely been defined by the players and the characters. Like that premise, we've got the hook that they've got to choose at the end, but then the game gives you so much permission with support, not like leaving you out in the open. I mean, it's got a lot of support and ideas, but it really gives you permission to do different things. So, for example, my story is a little bit different, close to the original premise, but we have a group of characters who in middle school, they were going to this game store. There were an older group of kids that they looked up to that were also playing games at the store. There were the owners that were there, and something happened to them. The kids, our PCs, know that something weird happened. They don't remember what it is, but that older group of characters, all but one of them went missing, and that was a big thing in the town and stuff. And we come back with them coming back to the town with the funeral of one of the owners of the store, and the game gets played with the GM being the person who was the survivor of that previous game, and he ends up dragging them into this other world. And they find out that they were there before, they don't remember it, and that these older kids are still there, most of them, that they remember. We kind of built them during the character creation process, like built up the relationships and who they were. In addition, like the character creation process of this game is dynamite. The whole session 0 is great, but they're kind of the enemy, these older kids, and a real threat. So that's been the setup. It is a little bit of echo of my own growing up, like in the late 70s with a local game store that we went to all the time. My sister was about 5 years older than me. She was in that older group. So there's a little bit of echo of that and the owners of the store and stuff there. So a little biographical weirdness in there. When I went to run this and kind of handpick the people, I didn't put it on the calendar. I really organized it because it's a game with a lot of bleed potential. We had played it before with Patrick Knowles running it, and Sherri and I walked away with the most bleed of any game we've ever played for just a short thing. So I opted not to share the recorded sessions because I wanted folks to feel free about their play. And wow, the character moments between the interaction of how the people built their characters as teens or as young teens to their adult selves, and then that interacting with the class that they got, because they don't get to pick, and GM assigns them a class. And that triangle of interactions has really created interesting stuff. The way our emotion night of loathing, that loathing is about other people reacting with loathing and repulsion, but also their own self-loathing. The way our dictator that Sherri's played with the emotion of vigilance, which is about paying attention to your surroundings, but also paying attention to yourself, ordering people to be able to do that has really been amazing. And those character moments, some of them, we've done a number of sessions where one, maybe two roles, and then just great player-to-player scenes, player-to-NPC scenes that push the fiction forward and develop the characters and so on. It's one of those games where we had one player that had to step away, and we had a scene after they left of their character in the game stepping away, and boy, it was affecting. It was just so much emotional weight in there. I don't think I've ever had a game that I've run that has as much rich character interaction as this. It's kind of been like, holy shit, it's so much. And great stuff, like great stuff. I never feel like any of that time is wasted. It always adds something. It always steps the characters forward. Even when their characters are kind of treading over the same ground, there's always something new that's being revealed about their past or their present or their interactions. The other thing that's been really interesting, because Die as it's presented and classic RPGs are very Western conception. Like the monsters that are in the Die book are very Western D&D style monsters, and what setting there is often kind of presented that way, certainly in the comic book and certainly in the visual stuff. But one of the things a number of persons of color players, and they wanted to avoid Western tropes, fantasy designs, approaches, all of those kinds of things. And that was really interesting because that threw me in a different direction than perhaps I'd expected. I don't do that much planning, but certainly I had started thinking about things, and I was like, okay, let me throw away some of the things I was thinking about. Let's see where we go with. So I've done a lot to avoid those kind of old themes and work in new kinds of stuff. So the realms, we've only explored, I want to say 3 realms so far. And the first realm, the kind of the starter realm, is a place where these human bird folk or the humanoid bird folk, and they get to choose how much they become bird or how much they become human. And they're very different. Like there's a whole idea of personal identity and built that in to kind of change that up and tried to draw imagery, stealing from Pinterest that didn't look like conventional, much more sort of Final Fantasy style and beyond. And that connected up to the whole idea of anthropomorphic animal people and people with bunny ears and all of that kind of thing. They moved from that into a realm of high Shansha, Wuxia magic fantasy of cultivators and draconic folks and all of that kind of stuff that brought in its own set of themes. And I mean, because a lot of Hearts of Wulin, betrayal and entanglement stuff, I brought in that. And then that led into the most recent realm, the one we've ended Arc with, which is a fantasy mecha riff on Neon Genesis Evangelion and the concept of child soldiers. And they met one of the older group of characters who has been here, who's not necessarily an enemy, but thinks all these people in this world are NPCs. And one of the players ended up stabbing him because they were so mad at him. But it was really good. It's been interesting to go in such a different way than I expected. It's a dynamite game, maybe not for the reasons that you expect it to be, and much more open than you might think. If you've read the comic and have some expectations about it from the comic beyond those first few issues, don't worry about that. Like, the premise is great. The contrast of real world to play world is dynamite. There are a number of supplements. There's a third one apparently coming out, which have scenarios that reframe the world. Like there's one that's based around card games. There's one that's based around former lovers. There's one that's based around like essentially 40K with the numbers filed off. And all of those kinds of things, which are all really, really interesting to me. It's a really good game. Sherri, do you want to speak to that?
I just want to say my fellow players in it are so good. It's like for each of them, I don't know why, but everyone stepped into, this is my role, and this is how I accept this role. And it's like Jose is, I am 100%, this is better than anything else I've ever had in my life. Ray is, yeah, this is exactly my life, and Agatha is, I can deal with whatever I have. I just do what I'm told. I just do what has to be done. And me hating every moment of it. I didn't ask for this. This isn't who I am. And it is so good. And of course, Elle was amazing as Samprit, who immediately was overwhelmed by what was going on. And it was like we got all the best players in that moment who just went, okay, here's this thing. And then here's how it's broken us. But we're stuck together. So it's been great. It is just, everything is sort of a open heart surgery of things. And it's not like we're modeling or we're going over emotions and stuff. We're playing that stuff. Those are our characters are. And it's just, yeah. And Lowell breaks our heart every time. There's nothing we can do. The world is beautiful and so messed up because of what has happened. And it's just, yeah, everything is a tragedy. We're going to fix it. Don't worry.
Yeah. That's what you say.
Yeah, that's what we say. Or we're going to fall to it. Who knows?
Anders, I don't know if you've read or played Die.
I've read the comic and I love it. It's one of the best things I've read the last several years. I think it's incredible. I haven't played the game. I haven't read the game. I think my original hesitation was that I thought it was more tied to the world. But as you've described it, that's not the case, which makes me more interested. But it also makes me a bit hesitant that the character types or classes or playbooks, whatever you want to call them, are so specific. That may be me projecting the feel that I don't generally like that in at least some games onto this game, where that is kind of part of the thing, because you're not just playing the character, you're playing the person who's playing the character.
Exactly. It's that meta that makes it so resonant in some ways.
Yeah. It's a game I think I would love to play, but I don't think I could run it.
Okay, that's fair. I will say, as you know, Open Hearth, we do open table and we post games. Anybody can sign up. I would not run Die without choosing the group, without people that I knew and trusted, because there is so much emotional weight. I think it is a game that really requires that. It's a fun game to run and a really interesting challenge.
I can imagine.
If you're listening to Around the Hearth, and you are listening to Around the Hearth, then statistically speaking, you like playing RPGs. Have you ever thought about,
what does it mean to play?
How do I have a better time at the table?
And what are the best games for me, anyhow?
Well, we've asked ourselves those questions too. I'm Ian.
And I'm Jose. Our show, A Different Kind of Hex, is all about the player experience of RPGs.
We'd like to invite you, yes, you, to join us as a listener or even as a guest.
If you're interested in coming on the show,
or you have something that you'd like to hear us discuss,
just write to adifferenthex@gmail.com.
That's adifferenthex@gmail.com. Looking forward to playing with you.
Me too.
All right, listeners, I am going to move into the second segment of our show. So, listeners, in our other segment, we ask everyone to talk about something they're really digging right now and why. Sherri, what is it? What is it that's giving you life?
You know what it is. I totally love a series that's on Netflix. It's Love Game and Eastern Fantasy. I am not going to apologize for it being girl romance fare. It is that lowest common denominator of it. Oh, he hates me, but now he loves me. It's so dumb. It's so cliche, and it's so perfectly done. The actress is like the cutest, and she just uses her face in the most comical manner. She's lovely, and yet her expressions make her look like such a doofus. It's just the best. And her, he hates me. Oh, I think I like him. He likes me. Maybe. I don't know. We can't figure it out kind of thing. He's a cutie too, but he's always very stern looking. I don't know. It's the best. It's the dumbest. It's just the right kind of stupid. And it makes me happy. And I am not going to apologize for that.
You haven't even mentioned the dumbest part, that the premise is that this woman reads a book by her favorite fantasy author and she hates it. And she writes a nasty review of it. And because of that, somehow she gets magically thrown into this world. And there's like a game system that's telling her things that she has to do.
Yeah, because it's a game that you play through the things, but she only plays through it once and thinks that she's seen the whole game. And that's what she does, is she thinks it's stupid. So then she gets thrown into the game. And now she's discovering all the paths she didn't take.
There's some translation things early on that make a lot of this unclear.
Yeah, it's very unclear. So I've puzzled over it. I think about it maybe more than I ought to. But it's just super fun and dumb and a delight to watch. And there's a lot of it. There's like 30 episodes.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of will they, won't they, when will they? I don't know, kind of now. So it's been fun. And it's about demons. It's got like, they're wuxia, and then there's demons that they're fighting. And it's so good. It's got, all the goofy fantasy stuff and bad special effects. It's the bomb.
Anders, if I may, what is giving you life?
Well, right now it's this description of this show. I went immediately to Netflix to see if it's available here, and it is. And I had already put it on my list, and I had just completely forgotten about it. This is not the thing that's giving me life now, but I have very similar feelings towards Cobra Kai, which is, at its core, it's a very silly soap opera, but it has enough skilled performances, at least from some of the actors, and the martial arts, that it's just fun to watch. And the last few episodes just dropped, so I've been watching that today. But that's not what's mainly giving me life. Right now, it's that I have gotten back to writing a bit again. I'm working on the next version of Stars in the Dark, but that's a more common thing. But I've gotten back to writing poetry a little bit, which is something I've been doing off and on for many years. And I've picked it up again and gone back and been revising some of the stuff I've written before. And I have found some of it to be actually good still. I actually enjoy reading it, which is not always the case. If I go back farther, it's not so much. There's a lot of, when you start out, or when I started out at least, there was a lot of, the self-indulgent emotional stuff. And now I feel like I found more worthwhile things to express. And I enjoy working with language. And this is a way to do that in a way that's also emotionally satisfying.
Awesome. For me, what's giving me life is Sherri mentioned the Mutants and Masterminds game that we're playing. And one of the things about that is we're doing a year one game where everyone chose an existing superhero and they're playing them out. We've got a number of people at the table that aren't as familiar with the comics tropes. A couple of them, like one of them knows Rogue from like one of the TV shows and maybe the movie. Another one is playing Raven, the only DC character in the group, and they know her from Go Teen Titans Go. And then we've got some real diehard, know the comic stuff. And then Sherri's somewhere in between. So, of course, I've been rereading Marvel because that's majority of the characters, and Sherri's running Sue Storm. And so on YouTube, I love watching videos. And one of the things we've been watching is this series called Mary Marvelite. And what he does is he will trace the history of a particular character across all of their continuity. And so it's like 60 years worth of continuity jammed into this thing. And of course, like dozens of writers who have all changed direction and tactic and stuff and trying to resolve all of that stuff. And I love when I watch these and I look over at Sherri and her eyes are rolled so far back in her head and is just like at times visibly angry at how stupid the continuity is when pulled together all at once. So it's a delight to see this stuff, but also it's more Sherri's reaction to the absolute condensed dumbassery that occurs when you've got so many years of continuity.
Oh my God. This poor Sue Storm. I mean.
Oh yeah. So that's been a delight. They're pretty good. Some of them go on a long ways. There's a whole period in the 90s and even the early 2000s that I really wasn't reading comics. And so I wasn't there for Apocalypse or the later Chris Claremont stuff. And I watched this stuff and my eyes start to spin. It's bonkers. So I think it's worth watching if you really dig lengthy, overly detailed explanations.
Yeah, they sort of devolve into, and then.
Yeah.
There's no like thread or continuity or reason even where the next thing happens. It's just crazy.
I love that sort of thing. So I will definitely check that out.
Yeah, it's got a lot of good stuff in there. So that is our show. Anders, is there anything you want to give a shout out to? Where can you be found? I can't remember if you have an itch page or not, or...
I do have an itch page. I have a couple of small games up there. I'm Anders Gabrielsson there,
okay,
which is also my Discord, and on RPGNet, which is the other place where I'm mostly active. In some places, I'm Amondod, ANOMDOD, and maybe Akogo, AKOGO.
We'll put the itch link, if you send it on to me, we'll put that in the show notes. People can check out your stuff. And Sherri, anything you want to shout to where you can be found or anything?
Why would you want to find me? If I'm somewhere, it's because someone brilliant is doing something and I've managed to get on the train ride. That's all. So, but if you must find me, I'm on Discord, Ozamel. That's where I am everywhere, always.
And you're in a lot of the session videos that I record too.
Like I said, on the train. with someone brilliant.
Listeners, that's our show. The Open Hearth podcast is a production of the Open Hearth Gaming Community. We have an online gaming calendar where folks can sign up for our sessions. If you've enjoyed this show, consider supporting our Patreon at patreon.com/openhearthgaming.com. We have a Discord. We're on Blue Sky, Tumblr, and Mastodon dice.camp. You can find out more about that at openhearthgaming.com. Hey, please consider rating, subscribing, reviewing our show, even sharing, commenting on. It really helps us out as we're getting started here. So if you can do that, I really appreciate that. Anders, Sherri, thank you for being on here with us.
Thank you. It was a delight and a joy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And listeners, that is our show.